Hello everyone, welcome to class 4 for the Craft of Grading 2 for Effects PhD. I'm Mike Matusik, your instructor. Today we'll be looking at the music video footage again from the Diamond Brothers, but this time we'll go for a more pushed look, have a little more fun with it, a little more of a creative look, a lot more stylized. A look you probably see in some music videos that have very distinct looks. And it's definitely a departure from what we did in class 3, which was a more straight ahead, a little more, had a steely kind of look to it, cool, complemented the set, but again, just kind of wasn't pushed too extremely. So I'm going to jump to my timeline where I have the footage without any correction on there. And the first pass that we colored was more straight ahead, more obvious kind of direction for this footage, but I think let's give an alternate look. Let's do something fun. And again, all this stuff is mostly with primaries, and you'll be surprised with the looks you can get with just working with lift, gamma, gain, and having fun with that, because that has the most control. I mean, when you start getting into secondaries and keying stuff, you don't want to get too effecty with it. With footage like this, has a lot of flares, there's a lot of motion, and it's sometimes tracking and keying this kind of footage is a little tough, especially when it's dark, to isolate stuff. So this footage lends itself to having a lot of fun in primaries. So the last look was very cool, almost monochromatic cool, but the thing that set it apart was those candles came through as orange, so it felt real. So here, to kind of get to that more stylized look, the first thing I'll do is I'm going to push the contrast and then also warm up the highlights quite a bit, almost to like a greeny yellow kind of vibe. And at the same time, I'll pull the blacks down. So again, I'm pushing whites here, adding warmth to those whites. And now you can see the whites, warming up the whites affects midtones and some of the high black areas. So what I'll do is I'll offset it by pulling some red, yellow out of the blacks, as you can see I'm doing here. And just kind of building it from there. So again, I don't want a red, yellow highlight, which would be more in this realm. I don't like where the flesh tones go, and it's not as, I don't like the way it looks as well, but you may like the way that looks, but I'm going to go more of a green-yellow highlight, and again, push that quite a bit, and then I'm going to pull the blacks down and put a little blue in those blacks. And I think I mentioned in the last class is if there's a music video that you're really digging the look for, or look of, rip it off YouTube or wherever you see it, pull it into your system, look at it up on the scopes, and really help you analyze what they're doing in the color correction. So again, I'm just going to keep kind of working this image until it starts to get somewhat interesting here. Again, warming up the highlights and cooling off the shadows. It kind of sounds like a cliche kind of look, but just play with it. The more you kind of get into it and just play with the variations of just cooler blacks, warmer highlights, and building up that color contrast that's so popular, you'll kind of realize why people love to work in those areas. So as you can see, just kind of playing back and forth, I'll save that and I'll pull that on and off. So that's the raw, and then with our look on top of it. And so as you're playing with that, you may want to just back off on saturation a little bit. It might get a little electric, but and I don't mind the blacks being a little lifted, where the blacks look really blue. It's just part of the look. It's, especially with the music video, just have fun with it. Just push it around, push it too far and pull it back. It's really, especially when you're just working with this footage by yourself, you're essentially the client. So, just have fun with it. So I'm going to put it there. And there's a lot more shots in this sequence, so I don't want to bore everybody with the same image. So I'm going to jump to another shot here. This is actually a pretty cool shot here because you can see how really under her face is, and we can have a lot of fun with playing with opening that up. So I'm going to take this shot, and just the first look that we worked on, you can see applying it to the shot looks actually pretty cool. It has kind of a matrix vibe to it, but it might be a little hot. So what I'll do is I'll just pull the whites back down, and I want to keep the blacks a little lifted. I don't want to go too crunchy with the blacks because there's a lot of cool, interesting detail in those blacks, and part of this look is the fact that those shadows are so blue. So again, and this is strictly primaries, so you could get this look with curves. You could get this look maybe with isolating blacks with a key and affecting the outside inside. You know, there's a million ways to do this, but primaries is, in my opinion, the best way to do it and the easiest. So again, I'll check my first shot to this shot. So the next thing I'm going to do with this shot, I'll pull a little, I don't want this to be too matrixy, so I'm going to pull a little green out of it. I still want some yellowy highlights, but not maybe that, not that yellowy green. So, and now the next thing, it's a little bright, so I'm going to pull the edges down. And you can see how that left side is starting to get saturated. Again, I'm dropping mid-tone, dropping the gamma, and just going to desaturate it. That's about 20%. And while I mentioned 20%, you know, just as a little tidbit with working with clients, a lot of times they don't necessarily like when you tell them, you know, I dropped saturation 15%. You know, you kind of like try to talk in, do you like A or B? Do you like the feel of this versus this? Sometimes clients like, you know, opposed to being too technical with your description of what you're doing. Sometimes, you know, some clients love that stuff. You know, with ad agencies and some high creative types, it's nice to just talk generally the overalls of what you're doing, and then A, B, and show them. Just a little side note there. So I have a little vignette on there. Not too much time on that shot. Moving to the next shot. There's dropping my base on there, and it's getting pretty dark. So what I'm going to do is open it up, and a lot of times, like why we build these stacks, I may have talked about it in an earlier class, but having a base that you kind of have control of, you know, this one was a little dark, so I opened it up. It allows you to hopefully be able to copy and paste your look layer onto another shot and have that work. So this one I opened it up, and just for kicks, I'm going to drop my look layer from the previous shot on top of that. And it definitely gives us our look. It's a little hot in the background. The blacks are a little washy, but actually I kind of like that. It's kind of interesting to see her reaction on her face. Because if I just drop this, if I copy and paste the previous shot right on there, you can see what it's doing. It's just, you know, it's just black. So by raising the base of the image, which is my tech grade I opened up, it actually copies over much better. But from there, I might bring the blacks down a skosh. I kind of like how that white, the yellow's blooming back there. It just kind of gives it a kind of a sexy look. But I'll just, again, bring the blacks down a little bit, open up the mids. And again, this is all just a feel. There's no right or wrong, really, when you're kind of pushing an extreme look like this. It's just, if you have a client sitting with you, are they happy with it? Are you happy with it? And does it have just a nice, a lot of times music videos, it's more about a sexy, cool, different look. In a feature, it might be a mood or an emotion. Is it a moody shot? Is the color? And then with a commercial, does the product look good? Sometimes sometimes commercials go for these push looks too, to kind of bring attention to the spot. But a lot of times it can just be, make it just look poppy and nice and clean. So those are kind of feeling nice together. But just for kicks, maybe I'll open up this part of her face just a little bit more. So what I'll do is I'll put a layer in there, put a shape, kind of squeeze it down to kind of accentuate the highlight on her face, and push a little white in there, bring the blacks back down. This may work, or it may be not a good idea, but you got to try it. So let's see how that's feeling. So actually, that definitely is bringing out some detail in her eye there. So I think that's a good call. I'll just actually bring it over to the other side of her face and see how that's feeling. So I kind of like the way that it looks when it's the blacks are a little more up. I mean, you could get away with crunching it down and then opening it up her face on the key side of her face there, but there's something about a look of those washy blacks that looks kind of interesting. So here's our original log film to our look versus our base. So you can see we're really opening this up, and these highlights are just going really extreme, but we're just having fun with it. So let's just see where it goes. So let's find another shot here. So this shot's obviously more abstract. There's nothing to really grab onto to like, so let's just copy a correction onto it and see where it goes. That doesn't work. That one kind of works. The blacks are nice and blue, but these highlights are just kind of neutral and kind of dead. So let's push a little warmth up in there. A little more contrast. So sometimes, again, shots like this that aren't necessarily iconic shots from the commercial or the video or the film, just try to get them dialed in, because you don't have like a good white black to balance it. You just kind of want to make sure it fits in there, and again, not spend too much time on it. The next shot, this might be kind of a fun shot to work on, and you don't have to like do a whole sequence. I definitely, when I'm working, I'll jump around a timeline until I kind of get a sense of, I feel like I've locked in this look and I'm happy with it. Then I'll maybe start from shot one and work my way through, but I jump all over the place, and there's nothing wrong with that. I basically go to the shots that excite me the most visually, color those to where I'm happy with it, and then do the other less exciting shots, I guess you could say. So again, I'll check the correction from this shot over to here. It's a little hot, a little nuclear in the whites there, just getting really, you know, when you start to see whites getting that bloomy and saturated, it starts to feel kind of affected and digital. And sometimes it's nice to have a finer roll off on those whites. So I'm just going to start from scratch on this one and see where that goes. And I'll push my whites up and then warm them up. Bring the blacks down, add some blue in the blacks. And if you have a tool that has finer control over the blacks, my main lift control that affects blacks has more fall off into the midtones, and I have another lift control that has a little bit more of a tight isolation of the black. So I'll use that one and just push blue there so it doesn't affect the mids quite as much. And I'll go back and add some warmth to my whites. And now what I'll do is try to soften those whites. You know, Baselight there's a few ways you can do it. I just take a fine control of the whites and just bring those down a little bit, so it just grabs the high point of the whites and brings those down. And then there's a pivot point on there that's able to control the softness of that white adjustment. So I'm just going to take that down until those whites don't feel as hard. So you can see that that's kind of here down to here, and that just takes the edge off that clippy white and just feels a little smoother, has a little more of a filmic kind of a fall off on it. And when I say filmic, film tends to have a softer roll off on the highlights, where digital sometimes just it hits 100% and just clips out hard, where film tends to roll off, has a little creamier look to it, some people say. I'm going to push that a little bit, throw a vignette on this. The top's getting pretty bright as I'm pushing the contrast, so I'll color correct on the outside of this vignette. And again, most of this, you can see my first shot is going much more matrixy green, so I might add a little more yellow to that shot, because I think later on I want a little more more in the yellow reds. So, but it's all about jumping around a shot, and maybe I start to like this one better, and then I'll go back and I'll fix the other one. So it's just kind of getting in a groove. There's nothing wrong with when you're pushing a look. It's okay that your blacks are kind of washy in the blues, because you're actually pushing. You can see on the scope here, the blues are raised up quite a bit. The reds are down here, crushing a little bit. That just adds to the look. And you know, your blacks don't all. You know, you have to know the rule to break the rule. The blacks don't always have to be balanced, or the whites don't have to always be balanced if you intend it that way. Typically, they tend to be. And you're maybe pushing the mids around where the whites are white, blacks are black, but music video, you're just having fun. It's a little more experimental. So that's still green, but pull a little more out. So again, there's a lot you can do creatively in just primary layer, a little vignetting. You know, I haven't really felt the need to jump to my secondaries really. I can come in here, and if you want to jump to a secondary in Baselight, it's called a hue shift, and I can grab the yellows, and that would be a way to adjust the overall color balance of it. I could do that. So there's just a lot of different ways to really adjust it. Park there. So as you can see, I'm just kind of playing with this footage, pushing warm into the highlights and cooling off the shadows and vignetting some areas. And you guys will have access to this footage, so just have a lot of fun with it and take it in a different direction than this and see where it goes, push it around. Just have, you know, there's no right or wrong really with this footage, because it's just a lot of fun to work on. Like, for instance, I worked through this shot with you guys, you know, earlier when I did the whole thing, I was here with it, so I wasn't quite as warm. I was much darker, more blue in the blacks, a little flatter. So just me approaching the same shot twice, way different than the first time I looked at it. So it's color correction is one of those things that you could color correct the same shot every day for a year. You could have, you know, every day could be a different look. So it's just. So just want to briefly talk about vignettes one more time here. And again, I've been generally using midtones to darken it, but just for an example, I'll bring the blacks down. And you can see that compared to, get back to where I was. So that's crunching it down with blacks versus mids. And the mids I can push down a little further. So you can kind of get to the same spot, but just depends what you're comfortable. Now whites, on the other hand, will start to look kind of foggy if I push the whites down. The blacks, again, the blacks will stay where they are, but that's with mids, with blacks, with whites. So mids and blacks, you could probably get away with either. Mids is probably the more standard, but the whites sometimes won't work or just won't look as good. So the next thing I want to do is, I think I've gone through enough of this kind of look of where you guys can play with it and see how it feels to you guys. But I also want to do a kind of a variation on this look and more of a cross-processy kind of look. And this is a nice image to do that on. So, you know, cross-process, when you're shooting negative film and you use the chemical process to develop it that you would use a positive, or shooting positive film and using the chemicals that you would use to develop negative to process that positive. So you're cross-processing it. So that's kind of where that comes from, and the colors come up totally different than they would if you used negative chemicals on negative film. So that's kind of where that term came from. I think you may see it in Instagram as X process or something, and that's kind of an old film technique. So I want to show you a quick little fun thing to do with curves, red, green, blue curves, to kind of emulate that in a respect, and it's kind of fun to color correct through that because it's essentially like you're putting a veil of cross-process over your footage, and it takes you into a different place, which is just kind of fun to experiment and just be creative with it. And for a music video, that's definitely the way to go. So again, I'll put my base on there. I think it's a little dark, so I'll open it up. And so I have a preset curve layer in part of my base stack, and I have the ability to, just like in Photoshop, or I'm sure most color correction systems, I can adjust the red, green, and blue curve independently of each other. So a characteristic of cross-process is it kind of has blue blacks like we've been doing with this push look, and warmer highlights. So you could get away with that. You can do that with a curve. So what I can do is take the bottom of the blue curve and bring it up, so I'm putting blue into my blacks. And then I can take the top of my blue curve and pull it down. And you're not necessarily seeing it in the image, but at least the curve is there, and you're taking blue out of the highlights. So you're warming the highlights up. So that's my blue curve. I'll take my green. Sometimes cross-process kind of has a greeny kind of look to it. So I'll just generally take a point on my green curve and just pull it up. And you can kind of start to see it going kind of cyan-y. Little dab will do you. And then in my red curve, I'll just add a little contrast. So I'll just put an S curve in my red layer there. So, and I actually have this adjustment saved that I kind of like the way it looks as a preset. So I'm not a huge fan of coloring with filters or coloring with presets. I kind of like to take each image on their own, but sometimes when I have like something that takes me a few seconds to build, I may have a preset built that I can copy and paste in any shot I'm working on, and just gets me in the ballpark quick. Or sometimes it's fun to pre-visualize something really quickly and just drop something on there as a happy accident and say, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let's maybe start from scratch and go in that direction. But so anyway, here's those curve adjustments. That's kind of in a cross-processy world. And I can say this is cross-process, and if this was negative and you process it, it may not look exactly like this. It's just kind of the vibe or the idea of an extreme look. So now that I have my curve built, I'll go upstream of that and adjust some contrast, and it's probably going a little, it's feeling very the crow-like here, and I'll add a little contrast to it and just warm it up a little bit more because it's feeling a little too cold. And before I get too into it, I'll just play through it and just see how it feels. So, it's starting to feel almost horror film looking. Again, it's taking it out of the context of a music video. Maybe this is a horror film, maybe this, something that's a little bit darker. It's definitely kind of selling the creep factor, which is kind of cool and different. So you can see where if I get rid of my look layer, so to speak, and I just look at those curve adjustments, I took the original to here, and then that felt a little too washed out and just overall cyany green, and I took it to there. So, you know, to have fun with that one, it's something you can do quick. I assume most color correction systems can do this. Just build these 3 different curves. I put an S curve in the red layer. I just bumped up the upper shoulder of the green curve, and the blue curve, I took the top of the blue curve down and the bottom of it up, and I'm coloring through that. So that's just an interesting way. It kind of remaps what your RGB does, and it just goes in a place where for me to get here with just primaries, it'd probably take me a while to spin dials or whatever to get to this point. So it's just kind of a fun way to experiment with a look. And I think there was a question in the forums about flesh tones and when you have an extreme look, where how do you bring back some normalcy to those flesh tones in a push look like this? I would say maybe I'll look at that in a future lesson, because especially with this footage, you know, she has quite a bit of makeup on and how the camera's moving around. This may not be the best example to do that, but we can take a look at that in a future lesson. But, you know, I would say there's the basic steely look you can play with. You can play with that yellowy highlights, blue or black look, and then this cross-process look. It's just some different things to play with. And again, it's, you know, it's in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. You know, what looks good to you and to your eye, and also if you're working with a client, what can you sell to the client? And it's just, I would just say have fun with it. You guys have access to this footage and play with it. You know, if you can post stuff on the forum, that'd be great. It'd be fun to see what you guys do with it. So I think that wraps up class 4 here. Hope you guys got some interesting ideas that you can kind of play with on your own. And remember that the Coke footage is available to download, and hopefully you guys have been playing with that footage already, because it'd be great to get that in the next couple of days, so I have time to review your submissions before class 5, where I'll critique them and review those. And if you have time, hopefully you can do a couple different looks. Just do one look where that you feel it should go and that you're happy with, and try to do something totally different and just see where that goes, and just have fun with it, and just try to find 2 different contrasting looks with the footage. So I'll see you guys next time, and I'll also be answering questions in the forum, so keep up with that. There's great stuff in there, and we'll see you in the next class. Thanks, guys.